Spain is very low. And yet, are they a BRICS nation?
What?
They're a BRICS nation, Spain.
Oh,
You know what a BRICS nation is? Well, you'll figure it out. And if the BRICS nations want to do that, that's okay, but we're going to put at least a 100% tariff on the business they do with the United States. You know what the BRICS is, right? You guys know.
Brazil,
You know what I'm
Russia.
saying, right? You know what I'm saying.
A few days ago, Donald Trump caused a huge surprise in Spain by suggesting that Spain could be a BRICS nation. We're talking about the bloc that seeks to compete with the G7 and is made up of countries such as Brazil, India, Russia, Iran, and China. A bloc that wants to put an end to Washington's commercial and political dominance in the rest of the world. Of course, most Spanish press outlets wrote it off as a blunder by the new president. You know, apparently so ignorant as to confuse the S in BRICS, which corresponds to South Africa, with Spain. Not only because Trump is smiling while he's saying it, but because he knew perfectly well what he meant, including also the threat to establish specific tariffs of 100% against Spanish products. In Washington's eyes, the BRICS are a club of countries not aligned with the West, a threat to its own power and influence in the world. But why on earth would Trump bring Spain, a NATO and EU country, into that definition? It doesn't make sense, does it? But what if we were to tell you that some of the decisions taken by Madrid in recent times have made Washington see Spain as an increasingly inconvenient partner? The list of reasons includes things like seeking an ever closer relationship with China, having a very lukewarm stance towards Russia, to have unilaterally recognized the Palestinian state after the terrible Hamas attacks of October 7th, or Spain's constant refusal to increase military spending. The feeling is that Spain has been trying for some years to win more sympathy among Washington's adversaries than from Uncle Sam himself. And not surprisingly, in Washington, they don't like that at all. But there's even more. Let's ask ourselves a question. What if BRICS were looking for an ally among NATO's ranks to defend their positions from within? What if the country currently most predisposed to play that role were precisely Spain? This is no joke. In Washington's eyes, we could be facing nothing less than the birth of a sort of BRICS Trojan horse at the heart of the major Western alliances. And that is exactly what could explain Trump's comments and his threat to put this country directly on the blacklist. But does this really make sense? To what extent is the Spanish government flirting with the West's great adversaries? Is Madrid playing both sides? Is Trump correct in his veiled complaint about Spain? Pay attention to what we're going to tell you next.
A betrayal by Spain?
Es un lugar muy adecuado para el comienzo de mi visita a Europa porque España es país amigo de Estados Unidos y el presidente Aznar es amigo mío.
In the early 2000s, then US President George W. Bush praised Spain as one of America's most reliable allies. Now, 2.5 decades later, President Trump brings Spain into the BRICS Club as one of the countries furthest away from Washington. And the question is, what on earth has happened during this time? What has happened in between? Well, in this video, we're going to play a little game. We're going to add some letters. Remember that BRICS is an acronym formed by the initials of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Well, we're going to gradually look for the connection between Spain and each of these initials. Pay attention to what we're about to tell you. But what on earth could link Spain to these countries? Why does the United States consider Madrid to be so out of alignment with its interests? Well, let's take a look at all the reasons why, and let's start with what may be most obvious to you: the problem of military spending. To begin with, one of the key factors lies in Spain's almost total abandonment of its role in global security and NATO, and an example of this is its negligible military spending. While 23 of the 32 NATO allies have increased military spending to more than 2% of GDP, Spain, led by Pedro Sánchez, is still far from that figure. Right now, Spain devotes barely 1.28% of its GDP to defense. This makes it the NATO country that makes the least effort in military matters. And if that in itself is already far short of NATO's minimum spending target of 2%, things are going to get even worse now that they are considering raising that target to 3%.
NATO's European members discussed 3% target for defense spending.
And let's see, in itself, spending less is not what angers the United States the most, even though Trump has always been very clear that in this matter, that all member countries have to pay their share in the defense of Europe. The biggest problem is that in Washington's eyes, this is a clear sign of a lack of commitment to the European security structure and to the West as a whole in general. So many in Washington are wondering, where the hell is Spain really positioned? Why do we, the Americans, have to keep spending resources to guarantee guarantee Europe's defense if these guys are not willing to fulfill even the minimum commitment they have made as NATO members? What kind of a joke is this? And in this case, what can I say? They do have a point. The state of the Spanish armed forces has plenty of room for improvement, and that's being polite. With very old equipment, lack of ammunition, lack of provisions, lack of operational soldiers, lack of special units, and a clear excess of administrative positions. In general, we can say that the various governments in Spain have turned the armed forces more into a job creation agency than into a truly operational armed forces. And that's not all. On top of that, also keep in mind that among all the countries that have helped Ukraine, Spain is one of the countries that has provided the least assistance in relation to the size of its economy. Meanwhile, however, purchases of Russian gas continue to increase, which is already twice as much as before the war in Ukraine.
Spanish gas imports fall sharply, but arrivals from Russia double in 20 to 24.
Let's pause here. We've already found the R of the BRICS, a possible political connection with Russia, gas purchases, very little military spending, and scant aid to Ukraine. Of course, consciously or unconsciously, the Spanish government must like Moscow very much. For the Russians, they probably wish all countries could be like that, right? I don't think that Trump's arrival has changed Madrid's agenda.
Sanchez reaffirms commitment to reach 2% in defense by 2029, despite pressure from Trump and NATO.
2% by 2029. Don't go that fast. And this despite the fact that it's taken for granted that this year NATO will increase this percentage to 2.5 or 3, something that Sanchez has already said he will not do. And the truth, they probably won't even reach 2% by 2029 either, because these kinds of statements are typical of Spanish politicians. It's the strategy of kicking responsibilities forward, hoping that things will change. By the way, meanwhile, Trump is no longer talking about 3%, but to set commitment of NATO partners at 5%. But what if I told you that there is much, much more to it than just military spending? Everything suggests that the Spanish president aspires to become a role model for the global left by opposing head-on the thesis of Donald Trump and views that, for him, represent nothing more than the international extreme right. Do you want an example? Well, let's keep going.
Palestine will be free from the river to the sea.
This expression, from the river to the sea, basically means advocating the total disappearance of the state of Israel. And mind you, this wasn't a statement by a random politician. No, it was said by someone who is a minister and vice president of the Spanish government, so it's no joke. In fact, one of the most controversial things Sanchez and his government have undertaken lately is their constant criticism and their political offensive against Israel in the wake of all the events following the Hamas attack on October 7th and the ensuing war in Gaza. And of course, remember that Israel is one of Washington's key allies. And while they have been unwavering supporters of Jerusalem, including, of course, the Biden administration, Sanchez and his government have been among the countries that have led all condemnations against the Jewish state, both in the European Union and internationally. The tension has reached such a point that Israel recalled its ambassador to Spain for indefinite consultations in November 2023. And as of today, there is not even an ambassador appointed, nor, of course, present at the Israeli diplomatic mission in Spain, even when Washington, and this time we aren't talking about Trump, but the Biden administration, suspended aid to UNRWA, the main UN humanitarian agency in Gaza, as it accused it of having Hamas terrorists and supporters in its structures. The Spanish government quickly increased its funding.
The government made voluntary contributions to UNRWA amounting to 18.5 million euros in 2023, following the decision to triple cooperation and humanitarian aid to Palestine. Spain's PM, Israel's disproportionate response in Gaza could destabilize the world.
All this has caused some people, both inside and outside Spain, to ask a question. Is Spain trying to wash Hamas's image at the expense of the Gaza offensive? And let me ask you a question. Which country has radically confronted Israel in recent months to the point of mutual military attacks? Another BRICS country? Iran. And apart from empty condemnations, the truth is that the Spanish government has not changed a single comma of its roadmap during recent months in relation to Palestine and Iran. It didn't do so even when Tehran twice attacked Israel, the only democratic state in the Middle East, with hundreds of missiles and drones. And be careful, because although the eye of BRICS belongs to India and not to Iran, the Islamic theocracy is part of BRICS. And it makes Washington wonder, why on earth has Spain launched itself against Israel when they know that there is a bigger problem in the Middle East that could explode at any moment? We're talking about Tehran's financing of terrorist groups or its nuclear plan. It's a very delicate situation in which Washington needs Jerusalem. And of course, Madrid's actions are not headed in that direction. Think about it. How was it possible for Madrid to cry foul over Israel but keep quiet about Iran? And this may seem like a bit of a stretch, but when it comes to the Middle East, the Americans and the Israelis don't trust anyone, especially when there's a conflict brewing. And things like this certainly don't help either.
Iran uses Spain to warn the West. It has activated thousands of nuclear centrifuges for possible military use.
To top it all off, Spain joined the legal proceedings initiated by South Africa against Israel for alleged genocide in Gaza.
Spain joined South Africa's lawsuit against Israel for genocide in Gaza before the International Court of Justice.
The Sanchez government was one of the first to join this South African-led trial after Bolivia, the Maldives, Namibia, and Pakistan. And that in itself is a very strong political statement. And yes, here we've come up against the S, Spain, hand in hand with another BRICS country in one of the great international storms. So in Washington's eyes, that's 3 letters of the acronym. Madrid is playing the game. But let's move on. Another concern in the United States is the ambiguity of the Spanish government on Venezuela, something that is rather interpreted as a tacit support of the Maduro regime, which of course doesn't help either. Not long ago, Spain was a key facilitator for Chavismo to get rid of opposition leader and president-elect Edmundo González. Don't forget that González's exile was negotiated with the presence of the brothers Delcy and Jorge Rodriguez inside the Spanish ambassador's own residence in Venezuela, and with the ambassador in front of him. Of course, this was interpreted by many as a clear service of the Spanish government to the Chavista regime. Let's just say that it could be interpreted that, thanks to Madrid's intermediation, the Bolivarian regime got rid of one of the most inconvenient figures for Miraflores at that time. What's more, Edmundo González's exile to Madrid is no coincidence either. In Spain, there's a huge Venezuelan diaspora, but not all of them are ordinary people who go to work. Part of the Venezuelan diaspora in Spain are very rich. And yes, logically, there are opposition businessmen who are in exile, that's true. But there are also many rich people who support Chavism, whose money is probably not exactly clean. And also many relatives of the regime's own leaders. In Spain, they found a perfect refuge, where they aren't asked any questions, where they come from, where they go, or where the money comes from with which they buy apartments in the Salamanca neighborhood in Madrid, one of the most exclusive. They are known as the Boli Bourgeoisie.
There is also the former Vice Minister of Electric Energy under Chavez, Nervis Villalobos, who acquired more than 100 properties in Spain, mainly in Madrid and Marbella, and the biggest Bolichico, Alejandro Betancourt, who acquired the successful sunglasses company Hawkers.
Nor can we forget the relations with Venezuela that are coming to light between former Spanish ministers, such as José Luis Ábalos, Pedro Sánchez's right-hand man at the time, and Vice President Delcy Rodriguez. And that's without mentioning the former president of Spain, José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, who has become a true spokesman for the Maduro government. By the way, let's remember that Raúl Morodo, the ambassador that Zapatero appointed at the time for Venezuela, has recently been condemned by the Spanish justice system for collecting about 5 million euros from PDVSA, the Venezuelan state oil company. Smells a bit fishy.
The Audiencia Nacional has sentenced Raúl Morodo, former Spanish ambassador to Venezuela, to 10 months in prison and his son to 2 years.
In short, things that do not exactly help to place Spain in the bloc that could be considered pro-Western or close to the positions of the United States. And yes, Venezuela is not yet part of the BRICS due to Brazil's veto, but that is likely to change soon. And in any case, protecting the Caracas-Havana tandem is very much in tune with the interests of the BRICS, rather than with the interests of Washington, of course. But VisualPolitik community, we're not done yet. Now we come to the main course. China, our letter C. If there's one thing that is setting off alarm bells in Washington and Brussels, it is the increasingly close commercial and, of course, political relationship between Spain and China. While the European Union has hardened its stance towards Beijing in recent times, Spain seems to be opening its doors wide to Chinese investment and Beijing's posturing. Is this a pragmatic strategy simply designed to gain a commercial presence in the Asian giant, or is it something quite different? Well, to begin with, the Spanish government has dissociated itself from the community decisions in one of the most critical sectors, the automobile industry. And while the European Union promoted and finally managed to impose new and very high tariffs on Chinese electric cars, Spain was one of the countries that decided to abstain. Not only that, but it even campaigned for them not to be approved. And Spain is a very important car producer. The official reason for this position? To protect competitiveness and attract foreign investment. The real reason? Perhaps the agreements with Beijing after several trips to this country by Pedro Sánchez. At least that is how many in Brussels and Washington saw it. But this is not all. The Port of Barcelona has approved the construction of a terminal with direct access to the port's rail network to facilitate exports of Chinese electric vehicles throughout Europe. What's more, Spain has become a magnet for Chinese investment in key sectors, such as automotive and renewable energies.
It's crucial to recognize that Europe's green transition will need Chinese products, technology, and investment to progress effectively. Chinese green investments could support the EU's sustainable development, create local jobs, which benefit European consumers.
Take, for example, Envision Energy, a Chinese wind turbine company that has already announced a $1 billion investment for the construction of a green hydrogen industrial park in our beloved Spain, which is all well and good. This is a rapprochement that, at least in some fields, seems to be bringing economic benefits to the country, at least in theory, but it also generates suspicions, especially at a time when tension and geopolitical competition with China is growing. The fact is that the United States and the European Union view these moves with suspicion. Washington has already warned that it could impose restrictions on European products manufactured with Chinese technology, which would seriously affect the Spanish industry that Sanchez is trying to rebuild with the help of Chinese capital. What's more, the greater flow of Chinese capital investments in Spain could also give Beijing more influence and a privileged position in strategic sectors such as port infrastructure and energy. And of course, the question on everyone's mind is Spain playing with fire? Is Spain boosting China in the West? Well, as we typically say on VisualPolitik, the devil is in the details. Listen up.
The flip side of the coin.
Okay, we've told you that Spain spends very little on defense, at least compared to its NATO partners. So far, we all agree. But pay attention, because this is a problem that has been dragging on for many, many years, long before Sanchez came to power. In fact, since his arrival at Moncloa Palace, Spain has been increasing defense spending. Not much in absolute terms, but increasing it nonetheless.
Military spending increases 62.4% in Spain since the arrival of Sanchez.
So does this mean that Spain under Sanchez's leadership is really starting to be more committed to its European and NATO defense obligations? Well, whether or not you like Sanchez, whether you agree with him or not, his government does at least seem to have a foreign policy strategy, unlike Rajoy. Spain now seems to be following a policy based on strategic ambiguity. Sanchez combines his membership with the West with a rapprochement, along with countries of the so-called Global South, the non-aligned and emerging powers. It's a policy similar to that followed by some of the more moderate BRICS countries, such as Brazil and India. In fact, speaking of India, not long ago, Sanchez visited Narendra Modi's country, where he was received practically as a hero by hundreds of people, and with his photo in giant size.
Modi gives Pedro Sánchez a walk amongst crowds during his official visit to India. Convertible car, garlands, and cheers.
But obviously, all this strategic ambiguity sounds very nice. But in the end, it's nothing more than ignoring the interests and values of the West. And Washington doesn't like that one bit. Think about it. In their eyes, we have the Spanish president refusing to comply with NATO. We have him defending Iran's interests at key stages and accusing Israel of genocide at the most tense moments. And to top it all off, there are his strange moves with the Chavista regime in Venezuela, and he's getting closer than ever commercially to China. And that's exactly what explains news items like these.
Trump ignores Spain in his first round of international contacts. The Trump administration talks to Morocco and Rwanda before Albares. In the last 9 days, Rubio has met or telephoned with leaders or foreign ministers of more than 40 countries, including Morocco, Yemen, Kenya, and Rwanda.
And Rubio is Hispanic, which in theory should help the countries in understanding each other. But of course, with all that we've seen, I'm sure you now better understand the reasons for Washington's position. And there's also the comment of Trump and the BRICS. And even more disturbing, his threat to impose 100% tariffs on Spanish products. Be that as it may, the question we all have now is how Sanchez is going to manage this US administration, which is much more hostile and very given to economic blackmail to get its own way. The Spanish government doesn't seem willing to show any sign of rapprochement with Washington, but rather the opposite. And this may end up leading to a trade war. Or perhaps a trade guerrilla war. Did Trump go too far with the BRICS joke? Well, seen through the eyes of traditional political communication, surely now, seen in Trumpist terms, it was almost a rather light warning signal. Now, does he have a reason to see Spain as an unreliable partner? Well, yes, that's also true. But at this point, the questions are over to all of you. Do you think Sanchez is playing with fire by wanting to show himself as a global adversary to Trumpism? Should Spain realign itself with Washington and comply with NATO? Or is it better to play both sides? Well, leave us your opinions below in the comments and let's start a debate. And very important, if you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. As always, thank you very much for being there. All the best. I'll see you next time.